Mercedes Sandwijken. I am the initiator of the Kitty Kotti dialogue table. And I was wondering if you could imagine that there could also be something lacking, missing, or could be added between protesting and policies. It looks like if we have to go from protest to policies, could it be possible that there could be something that needs to happen in between, something else that could happen in between? I'm very interested. I have my ideas about that, but I would like to ask: is this where we're heading up to? Is there something else in between?
Yeah. Okay. I'll open it up to Niall. I think at a certain point you said in your talk. At a certain point in your talk, you say you need protests to mobilize people to inform your policy. Can you relate that to what Mercedes just asked?
I'll try. Thank you. I think it's wonderful. There's, I'm sure, a lot of things that go between protest and policy. And I'm sure we, based on our different contexts, have a set of things that we've experienced as protesters and also as people who are interested in policy. One of the things that I will emphasize that I think is important, particularly where I'm at, but I'm sure this is something that is also important in all of our contexts, is the need for grassroots community organizing. And so I believe I'm really interested in, but also committed to grassroots community-based organizing. And one of the reasons is because all of the things that we've been talking about, I think, really fundamentally comes down to having a base, having a community, one, to be able to hold politicians accountable if we're going to talk about electoral politics, who's also going to be able to come up with a platform for politicians who can't come up with a platform for what's best for our communities. The community has to do that itself. If that community is not organized, then it's impossible to come up with a platform that's truly from the community, and you outsource that work to a politician who doesn't really understand the needs of that community. And so another thing is when we have protests, protest itself without rigorous sort of grassroots community organizing, to me, is not sufficient and it's not sustainable. It's a series of events which make us feel good, which we can post to Twitter and Facebook. And I'm not trying to be cynical here, but I'm just trying to be real that, you know, it's really easy to get caught up, especially in the age of virtual organizing, where we sort of conflate mobilizing with organizing. And so I want to make a distinction there to say that organizing, while it's not easy to define, I think has something to do with sustainability, something to do with connecting events to ideas and connecting at those events other people together to build communities that meet over space and time regularly and who come up with ideas in a democratic participatory process and not a sort of hierarchy. So I'm saying a lot, but I think the one thing that I want to point out is that you need day-to-day people who are a part of these protests, who also meet to inform this policy, but then again, when the policy is informed, as Derek and many others said, that's never sufficient, that goes back to figure out what we got to protest next to transform not just the policy, but the very community and society in which we live. So I think grassroots community organizing is always important.
One of the interesting things you mentioned before in your earlier answer was the notion of imagination and being able to imagine a different world. Can you talk a bit more about your project, 7 Last Words?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
This is a good shout out right here.
Yeah.
Infomercial. Nah, so I had gone to Ferguson, and I went to Ferguson because I was just mad as hell. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a young person who was extremely upset and couldn't sit in my seat anymore as I was applying to PhD programs. I was just like, I can't take this. I gotta go. So I went, ended up meeting a community of people on the bus ride back to New York from Ferguson. I had just finished a Master's of Divinity, which is a 3-year master's program where you study theology. I was really interested in the intersection of religion and society. It was a book that I had read by a black theologian by the name of James Cone. He wrote a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And if you haven't read that book or heard of James Cone, I really encourage you to pick it up and try to find it on Amazon or something. In this book, James Cone, in the tradition of Black liberation theology, connects the crucifixion of Jesus within the Roman Empire to the lynching of Black people in the United States or within the American Empire. And so it was a piece of theology that really stuck with me, but also started to inform the way in which I was able to connect my theological commitments to my political convictions. And so on the bus ride back, I'm mad as hell because there's not many spaces within the church, or hardly any at all, where I and other young Black people can articulate and express our rage, right? A lot of us are very upset, very mad, rightfully so. But in a lot of churches and a lot of theologies, it was like, well, just pray and everything's going to be okay when you get to heaven. It's like, well, we're living in hell on earth while some other people are living in their own kind of heaven on earth. So that's not a good enough answer. And so in the Black church on Good Friday, and normally what happens is 7 preachers come together and preach the last words of Jesus according to Scripture. It's like the highlight, I think, of the Black church. And so what I had an idea to do was to remix that. So to have 7 preachers of different faiths and different denominational backgrounds come together and preach the last words of Black people who were killed by police or vigilantes. Doing that in the tradition of a Black liberation theology and of a James Cone. So to give one example, and I'll stop, is the first time we did it, it's been done several times, which is exciting. The first time we did it, I preached the last words of Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis was a 17-year-old Black teenager in Jacksonville, Florida. He was driving with 3 of his friends to the local gas station to get gum and cigarettes, playing hip-hop music, something regular, very mundane, normal thing that kids do. And a white gentleman who was parked next to him by the name of Michael Dunn, who was in his mid-40s, not so politely asked Jordan and his friends to turn their music down. Essentially, he didn't like their music, but also didn't like the fact that they were young and Black and playing the music that they liked. So Jordan looked at Michael Dunn, and his last words were, "Fuck that nigga, turn that shit up." And he said that to his friends. Michael Dunn proceeded to go to his glove compartment, take out his gun, and shot into the car several times, killing 17-year-old Jordan Davis. So one of the reasons why I think it was important to create this platform was because there's so many other names of people who are not mediated to our international community. It's more than just Mike Brown. It's more than just Trayvon Martin. So it was a way to tell these stories of people whom we don't know and names we don't tell. And so we did that. Preached it from a Black church in a pulpit. Was able to also raise money. So it was important not just for it to be a spectacle, but we raised money in order to give to other grassroots organizations that were doing the work.
Beautiful.
And any more questions from the crowd? Okay, I'll come to you in a second, but before we come there, also the notion of imagination in your work, Adam. Why is my curriculum white? I think that's also looking at imagining a different way of learning.
Yes, it is. I often struggle with I often adopt the phrase, I can't remember who used it, I think it was someone from the Zapatistas or something, who often said, we make the road by walking, right? So there's no kind of blueprint for like a utopic society. We don't really know what, how the perfect society can or should be structured, but we know where there are problems, and we can think of ways in which they could be improved. And it's a continual process, right? And I actually feel quite suspicious of, grand theories of, this is how we're going to create the perfect society. I'm quite suspicious of, dare I say it, Marxism and these kind of things like, this is the blueprint. Marx's critique of capital, brilliant, but I don't think you can necessarily say I've got this brilliant critique of capitalism, but I've also constructed how to create a utopic economic system. A little bit more sceptical when it comes to that. So I think that in a very gradual way we can criticise and reform and change the problems that we see within our society, deconstruct the illegitimate power that individuals and institutions hold, and democratise decision-making, democratise power, democratise our economy, democratise our resources, until eventually we have a system which I think is far more human.
Great. There was a question in the back there. Yeah.
Hi. You were talking earlier about...
Can you stand up? And,
Sorry. Hi. Now you were earlier talking about the grassroots organizations, right, and the community-based organizations. And before that, you guys were talking about the reform versus revolution. And I was wondering if you see that community organization, if you see it within the system or outside of the system and trying to start something new. Because I've studied in Jamaica and I studied Rastafari communities. So I've seen people literally leaving Kingston, for example, or a city to go up into the hills and start up something new and grow their own foods, have their own little primary school for the kids, you know, do homeschooling, so that they can raise their children into a new sort of system, so they don't have to have the Eurocentric education that a lot of children there still have in the public schools, not being dependent on the food being imported from the US. And trying as much as possible to be outside of that system. So how do you see that community-based organization?
It's an excellent question. I'll try to keep it short. Sometimes I talk too long. So are you asking me personally what I think of as an ideal, like a community-based organization, ideally how they would situate themselves, or what's actually happening?
Yeah, what's happening, but also like what's happening now, and what do you think would be the best way? Because like, do you aim for the, because the topic is from protest to policy, but protesting is against the system, right? And policy is also the policy of the system. So the community organizing is also all having to do with the system or leaving the system and doing something new?
Okay, all right. So from my understanding, and this is not just present day, but historically, at least within Black communities, I'm sure within all organizing communities, there's always been various strategies for people to imagine their freedom and go about practicing what it takes to get there. And so within the history of Black freedom struggle, particularly in the United States, as I know it, there have been groups of people, community-based organizations or national organizations who do community organizing, who in one camp say, well, you know, we don't fundamentally believe in the electoral policies, we don't fundamentally believe in the promises of the US government, we don't fundamentally believe that we could ever see ourselves free as the government is currently constituted, thus we're going to turn our backs against the state and create our own communities. And we see that within certain kind of Black nationalist discourse, and we see that within certain other kinds of spaces within Black organizing. Then you have, and this is a simplified version, there's many in between, many fractions in between. You have groups of organizations who say, well, some for practical reasons, some for moral reasons, say, we are going to engage the state. Practical reasons is saying, creating our own communities is not sustainable. This is the argument. Creating our own communities, well, we built this community, so why are we going to turn our backs on a state that we helped build, right? So these are some of the arguments and reasons that people are giving. People in this community organizing world are trying to find ways to engage the state. Some of them are trying to get elected, right? Some of them are trying to hold who's currently elected accountable, and all these different tactics. I think all those things are still happening today. In the newly emerging movement, you see and hear conversations and see organizations, some of whom are saying democracy has never worked for Black people and it never will. We have to fundamentally turn our backs against the state. There's a tradition called Afro-pessimism that has really coming out of the University of California system with people like Jared Sexton and others who are articulating a worldview, not just a national view of African descended peoples, but a worldview that is essentially pessimistic. That's saying that white supremacy, what they would call ontology, the very beingness of white supremacy is so bad that there's really no way of getting out of it. And so these people describe the suffering of Black people in America, but are not offering us particularly a way out. So that's something that's actually becoming very popular within the United States. Then there's people who are pushing back. Intellectuals, also activists, organizers, day-to-day people, and saying, no, the best of our tradition has always said that there is something to be optimistic about, and thus we need to figure out a way to engage the state. I don't have an ideal type for, especially morally, I don't have a moral ideal type to say that morally this is what I think that all community-based organizations or community organizers should be doing. I'll be honest and transparent to say that I actually wrestle with this a lot. I'm a part of an organization in Newark called the Maroon Project, which is named actually after maroon communities in Jamaica and the southern parts of the United States.
And Suriname.
And Suriname.
And other Caribbean islands.
And Caribbean islands. Thank y'all for helping me. I talk too much, so I want to say everything. And so at the same time, I'm interested in pragmatism. I'm interested in how we can actually work together and figure out what we can do in engaging the state. So I don't have an answer. I do believe right now that so long as a state exists, we need to engage it. We need to do something about it. I think completely turning our backs on it outsources the power that we do have to those who are currently running it, and that's something that I don't think is good for us. So I can say that.
Derek, can I have your thoughts on that? Because you're part of the Young Citizens Council of St. Louis.
Yeah, but I'm actually going to speak from, I think, a legal perspective. So we have this conversation. You're not even looking at me. I'm over here. No, I'm just so we have this conversation a lot in the United States in terms of addressing the criminal justice system. Some people say that it's broken. Other people say it was, when did it break? It's always been working this way, and these are just the consequences of it. So as a law student thinking about where I'm going to go practice after law school, we have conversations about whether to go work in government and work inside the system, or work for organizations like I'm working for now, which is a civil rights law firm that's based in St. Louis. But I heard someone say something that's really, really practical, and maybe this goes back to the reform conversation. So the Ferguson Police Department is currently being monitored under the Department of Justice, which is our Ministry of Justice. Yeah. So right now, the police department, they have to be in constant communication with attorneys, with the government, to make sure that they're not engaging in patterns and practices of racist behavior. This is happening in Ferguson. It's happening, or at least it's happening in Newark. It's happening in Cleveland with the police department, who an officer murdered Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old who was in a playground with a toy gun. Upon seconds of seeing him, murdered him upon seconds of seeing him. So we see within the government there are people who believe that, well, there are people who are working to do this monitoring, and some people think that's enough. The organization that I work for now is called the Arch City Defenders. Last year, before Michael Brown was killed, they did a lot of work about the municipal structures in Ferguson and other northern counties, and they basically uncovered all these patterns of racial practices that were found in the Ferguson's police department almost a year before the government did. But they really couldn't do a lot about it because they didn't have the power to go and check emails. They didn't have the power to go in and request records. So when the Department of Justice found emails that said, hey, we need to basically arrest more black people because we need our revenues to go up. The organization that I work for obviously is not going to have access to those emails, but someone working within the government can get access to those emails. So the systemic conversation, working within the system versus working without the system, again, I don't think that we have to choose. I think the concept of choice where you have to pick one is very white supremacist, because we need people to do the work from all different sides, right? We need people to maroon, to create children who will have a choice of what they want to do as adults. Because like every maroon child is not going to stay a maroon child. Like I'm comfortable making that statement. Every lawyer who needs to go and seek out racial practices, to some degree, may need help with someone within the system. And so when someone who's working within the government is able to access that information and they're able to give it to the public is able to hold certain institutions accountable for it. Now the organization that I work for, we can sue the police department based on information that was also uncovered by a government entity. So in some degree, I think it's okay to be reformist because we have to do the work every day. Otherwise, the black people, the black, brown, poor people living in Ferguson wouldn't have access to a particular type of justice. But I also belong to an organizing group who know that this entire court system has to go. So I think in one way we have to work to overthrow the court system, and we do that by dismantling each piece of it, using people who are working in multiple different roles in order to achieve that goal.
Great answer. we have time for one last question. One last? No? Well, maybe I have one. Mitchell, I think the question is on not just our own privilege as being here in the West, but also our privileges as men. I think when looking at leaders, for instance, male leaders are pushed to the forefront. What does that do when looking at protest and looking at policy? And what does that do when looking at kind of obscuring the work that women are doing within protest movements?
Excellent question. I think this is a very real topic which I've been thinking about over the past period. You're personally involved in this whole anti-Black Pete movement campaign that has arisen over the past years here in Holland. And I think that you've seen yourself, and most of us have seen that most of the people who are seen as leaders are men, Black men. And even within that movement, there has been a discussion, a debate on male dominance, on patriarchy. In the eyes of some, I'm even part of that patriarchy. And to be honest, the first time I heard that critique, I was a bit surprised. I thought, I'm trying to, put an effort and sacrifice my time and energy for a greater cause. Why are people criticizing me because I'm male? It's kind of nonsense. That was because of my own privilege and my own blind spot for this notion of patriarchy and the way that it structures the world within this neoliberal capitalist system. So for me personally, I see it as a process where I myself, as a Black male, have to acknowledge that I am privileged within this matrix of domination and power as well. And it starts with, awareness, consciousness, acknowledging that this is a problem, a historical problem, because also if we look at, the civil rights movement of the United States, a lot of the work has been done by women, people like Ella Baker and others, which is not recognized as much as the work of men. So I am having these reflections, discussions. I am being criticized and educated myself by, for example, my own partner, Jessica, who got her second master's degree today.
Hey.
Congrats.
Just welcome. So I think it's a very important question and topic to discuss, the notion of intersectionality. And I see it as a learning process for, this movement and our own community to, be critical towards the world, towards this system of white supremacy, racism, etc., but also to be critical towards ourselves, and also try to translate it into concrete action and material reality. And what we try to do, or at least what I try to do, is to, first engage in discussion, listen first, to the women that I work with. And I think, for example, Jessica, my partner, she's an expert on these topics, and I think she and other women within the movement, such as Miss Kitty, can definitely play an important role in this process of change of us males, the patriarchy, becoming more aware of this issue.
Great answer. Yeah, right? Yeah. I think tonight was about looking at blind spots, our own and those of the system, and also looking at how we can change that. And I'm glad you guys were able to show us bits and pieces of your work and what you're doing, and also connect to a sort of a global level of, hey, we're doing something, we're working at it, and it's not just superficial protest event based, it's like doing the work and digging and digging and digging and trying to get to a core that might not be there, but something that for us is important. I want you guys to give another round of applause for Derica. I also want to give a big shout out to Simona's Kitchen, and to Delano Veira, the director, and thank you all for being here, and the bar is open, so go drink something, give us your money. And for those of you who don't know, every Wednesday we have a talk show here, kind of like this. Tonight was a special edition. And next Wednesday we're going to also have a film viewing on the film We're Doing It for the Children, which was made in 1982 from a Black Afro-Sudanese perspective on Black Pete. Which is, I think a lot of people might not know that film even exists. So that's a pretty special occasion. And someone you work a lot with, or New Urban Collective works a lot with, Astrid Elberg. She's going to be one of the guests. And for those of you who don't know, because you don't know the film, she's in the film. Yeah. So which is really special as well. So I hope to see you guys. On Wednesday. Thank you.